The cashier's check sitting on my sterile hospital bed had exactly 7 zeros, $22 million. The condition? Walk out those double doors, never contact my newborn twins again, and let my monster of a mother-in-law raise them. I looked at her smug, aristocratic face, and I took the pen. My name is Daisy. 3 years ago, I thought I was living a modern-day fairy tale. I was a 25-year-old high school English teacher in Chicago, living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment with a radiator that hissed like an angry cat. That was until I met Alex Montgomery. Alex was the heir to Montgomery Holdings, a commercial real estate empire that practically owned the Chicago skyline. We met entirely by accident at a charity gala I had volunteered to work at. He was charming, self-deprecating, and seemed actively eager to distance himself from his family's suffocating wealth. He drank cheap beer with me, laughed at my terrible jokes, and promised me a life built on love, not ledgers. But I didn't just marry Alex. I married his mother, Elara Montgomery. Elara was a woman who commanded rooms not with her voice, but with the sheer, terrifying weight of her presence. She was always impeccably dressed in Chanel, her neck adorned with pearls that probably cost more than my lifetime earning potential. From the moment Alex introduced us at their sprawling estate in Lake Forest, she made her disdain for me palpable. I wasn't a person to her. I was a genetic and financial liability. I was the pedestrian mistake her son was making during his rebellious phase. "You have a lovely, quaint little life, Daisy," Elara told me on our wedding day, adjusting her diamond cuffs as she cornered me in the bridal suite. "But do not mistake Alex's infatuation for permanence. Montgomery men require a certain caliber of woman. You are a detour. Try not to cause a pileup when he eventually gets back on the main road." I brushed it off. I loved Alex, and he told me to ignore her. But after the honeymoon, the dynamic shifted. Alex's rebellion faded the moment his father passed away, leaving Elara as the sole executor of the Montgomery Trust. Suddenly, Alex was terrified of losing his inheritance. He stopped drinking cheap beer. He started working 80-hour weeks at the firm. And he started listening to his mother. The suffocating grip of Elara tightened when I discovered I was pregnant, and not just with one child, with twins, a boy and a girl. Instead of joyous celebration, the pregnancy felt like a corporate acquisition. Elara completely took over. She fired my beloved OBGYN and forced me into the care of Dr. Harrison Gallagher, a high society concierge doctor who reported my medical details directly to her before he even spoke to me. She dictated my diet, my schedule, and even tried to legally force me to move into the family estate for the safety of the heirs. Alex did nothing. Every time I pleaded with him to stand up to her, he would sigh, run a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and say, "Daisy, be reasonable. She just wants what's best for the babies. It's her money paying for the top-tier care. Just nod and smile." I felt completely isolated. My best friend, Abigail, warned me that I was losing myself, but I was too exhausted, too heavy with the twins, to fight a multi-billion-dollar matriarch. I told myself it would get better once the babies were born. Once I held them, Alex would realize he was a father first, and a son second. I couldn't have been more wrong. At 34 weeks, I developed severe preeclampsia. My blood pressure skyrocketed to dangerous levels. I was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night, my vision blurring, my head pounding with a terrifying rhythm. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under for an emergency C-section was the sound of Elara's voice echoing in the glaring lights of the operating room. "Forget the mother if it comes to it," she barked coldly to Dr. Gallagher. "Just save the Montgomery heirs." I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and a searing, white-hot pain in my abdomen. My throat was dry, my lips cracked. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the private recovery suite. "My babies," I croaked, panic instantly gripping my chest as I felt the emptiness of my stomach. "Where are they?" "They are in the NICU." "Perfectly healthy, though a bit small," a voice replied. It wasn't Alex's voice. I turned my heavy head to see Elara sitting in a plush leather armchair by the window. She was wearing a pristine white silk blouse and a tailored blazer, looking as though she were attending a board meeting rather than visiting a recovery ward. Beside her stood a man in a sharp charcoal suit, Gregory Pierce, the Montgomery family's ruthless lead attorney. "Where is Alex?" I asked, trying to push myself up, only to gasp as pain ripped through my surgical incision. "Alex is down the hall. He asked me to handle this." "Transition," Alara said smoothly. She stood up, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor, and walked over to my bed. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't offer a drop of water. Instead, Gregory stepped forward and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on my lap. On top of it sat a sleek, black fountain pen. "What is this?" I breathed, my hands trembling as I touched the leather. "It is your exit strategy, Daisy," Alara said, her tone devoid of any human empathy. "It was strictly transactional. You survived the delivery, which is fortunate for you. But this charade ends today. You are entirely unfit to raise Montgomery children. You have no pedigree, no substantial wealth, and frankly, your emotional fragility is a detriment to their development." "You're insane," I whispered, hot tears welling in my eyes. "They are my children. I'm their mother." "You were their incubator," she corrected sharply. "And you will be compensated for your services." Gregory cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Mrs. Montgomery, Daisy." Inside this folder is a legally binding non-disclosure and severance agreement. If you sign it, you agree to relinquish all parental rights to the twins Leo and Lily. You will grant full, uncontested custody to Alex Montgomery. You will agree to an immediate annulment of your marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. You will pack your belongings from the penthouse within 24 hours, and you will never, under any circumstances, contact the children, Alex, or Alara again. My breath hitched. I felt like I was drowning. "I will never sign that. I will fight you. I will take Alex to court." Alara laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "With what money, Daisy? Your teacher's pension? The moment you leave this room without signing, Gregory will freeze all joint accounts. Alex will file for emergency sole custody, citing your physical and mental instability, which Dr. Gallagher is fully prepared to testify to. We will drag you through a legal war of attrition until you are bankrupt, homeless, and broken. You will lose them anyway." "Alex would never let you do this," I sobbed, looking frantically at the door. "Alex!" I screamed, tearing at my throat. "Alex!" The heavy door creaked open. Alex stood there. He looked pale, avoiding my eyes. He was wearing the Rolex Alara had bought him for his birthday. "Alex, please," I begged, reaching my trembling hand out toward him. Tell her she's crazy. Our babies, Alex." Alex finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes shattered my soul into a million jagged pieces. There was no love. There wasn't even pity. There was only cowardice. "It's for the best, Daisy," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mother is right. You don't fit into this world. The stress would destroy you. The kids, they need the Montgomery Foundation. I'm sorry. I really am." He turned and walked out, letting the door click shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. My husband, the man who promised me a lifetime, the man who had held my hand as we listened to 2 tiny heartbeats on the ultrasound, had just sold me out to secure his trust fund. He was discarding me like defective merchandise. "The compensation," Gregory interjected, pulling a piece of paper from his breast pocket and laying it flat on top of the contract. It was a certified cashier's check, made out to Daisy Higgins. "Fortuctive, null. 22 million, Alara stated, watching my face with hawkish intensity. "Enough to disappear. Enough to live a very comfortable, very quiet life far, far away from Chicago. Think logically, Daisy. You can walk out of here a multimillionaire, or you can walk out of here with the clothes on your back into a legal meat grinder that will chew you to dust." I stared at the check, the sheer scale of the number blurred before my tear-filled eyes. I thought of my tiny babies in the NICU, Leo and Lily. If I fought, Alara wasn't lying. She had judges in her pocket. She had endless capital. They would portray me as an unstable, gold-digging, manic depressive. I would end up with supervised visitation at best, destitute and unable to provide for them. I would be fighting a war I had absolutely no weapons for. Unless I took their weapons. A sudden, freezing calm washed over me. The hysterical sobbing stopped. The pain in my abdomen dulled, replaced by a dark, burning ember of pure, unadulterated hatred. Alara thought she was buying my absence. She thought she was purchasing my silence. She didn't realize she was funding her own destruction. $22 million wasn't just hush money, it was a war chest. With that kind of capital, I could hire lawyers outside of Chicago who couldn't be bought. I could hire private investigators to dig into the notoriously secretive Montgomery holdings. I could build an empire of my own, brick by brick, until I was powerful enough to tear theirs down to the foundation. I wouldn't just fight them for my children. I would annihilate the very ground they stood on. I slowly wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. I looked up at Alara, completely dead-eyed, masking the inferno raging inside my chest. "Tax-free?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly steady. Alara blinked, clearly taken aback by my sudden shift in demeanor. A victorious, albeit slightly unsettled, smirk crept onto her face. "Yes. The taxes have been handled through a private trust. The full amount is yours." I picked up the black fountain pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I didn't read the contract, I knew what it said. I signed my name on the dotted lines. Daisy Higgins, not Montgomery. I surrendered my title. I surrendered my immediate future. Gregory quickly scooped up the documents, slipping them back into his briefcase, as if afraid I would snatch them back. Alara handed me the check. "A wise decision, Daisy. The smartest one you've made since marrying my son," Alara said, turning toward the door. "Your belongings will be shipped to a P.O. box of your choosing. Goodbye." They left me alone in the room. I looked down at the slip of paper in my hand. $22 million. My babies were down the hall, and I was about to walk out of this hospital without them. The agony of that reality brought a fresh wave of nausea over me, and I clutched a pillow to my stomach, biting my lip until it bled to keep from screaming. "I will be back for you, Leo. I will be back for you, Lily," I promised to the empty room. "Mommy is just going to work." The next day, against medical advice, I checked myself out of the hospital. I didn't go to the NICU. I knew if I saw them, if I smelled them, I would break, and I needed to remain completely unbroken for what came next. I walked out of the double doors of Chicago Presbyterian Hospital with a bleeding surgical wound, a shattered heart, and a $22 million check burning a hole in my pocket. It was time to build a guillotine. I did not go to a tropical island. I did not buy a mansion or drown my sorrows in luxury. I took my $22 million and boarded a first-class flight to New York City, a place where money was the native language and power was the only currency that mattered. The first year was a blur of agonizing physical and emotional recovery. I rented a sterile, high-security penthouse in Tribeca, not for the view, but for the isolation. Every night, I woke up with phantom cries echoing in my ears. I imagined the weight of Leo and Lily on my chest. When their first birthday arrived, I sat on my immaculate hardwood floor, surrounded by financial ledgers, and sobbed until I threw up. The grief was a living, breathing monster in my apartment, but I refused to let it consume me. Instead, I fed it. I turned my grief into an engine. I knew that to destroy Alara Montgomery, I couldn't just have money. I needed a weaponized infrastructure. My first call was to a firm in Manhattan specializing in high-net-worth wealth management. I didn't want standard portfolios. I wanted aggressive, predatory growth. But more importantly, I needed intelligence. Through my new legal counsel, I hired Silas Holloway. Silas was a former forensic accountant for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division who had transitioned into private corporate espionage. He charged an exorbitant retainer, and he was worth every single penny. His mandate was simple: I want to know every secret, every lie, and every vulnerability within Montgomery Holdings. You understand, Miss Higgins. Silas told me over a secure line during our first encrypted video call. Families like the Montgomerys have legal moats filled with crocodiles. They bury their skeletons under shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. It will take time. I have time, Silas, I replied, staring at the screensaver on my monitor, a grainy, illicitly obtained photo of my twins being pushed in a stroller by a nanny I didn't know. Drain the moat. While Silas dug into Chicago, I went to work on Wall Street. I didn't have a finance degree, but I had $22 million of liquid capital and a burning, obsessive drive. I partnered with Julian Sterling, a semi-retired corporate raider who had been forced out of his own hedge fund by a younger, backstabbing board. Julian was brilliant, ruthless, and bored. He became my mentor, and I became his vengeance project. Together, using a massive chunk of my capital, we founded Aegis Global Partners, a boutique private equity firm. Julian acted as the public-facing CEO, the silver-haired shark who brokered the deals, while I operated as the anonymous majority shareholder, the ghost in the machine. For 2.5 years, I worked 100-hour weeks. I learned how to short stocks, how to identify distressed assets, and how to execute hostile takeovers. Aegis Global grew with terrifying speed, fueled by Julian's connections and my completely emotionless willingness to risk my capital. The 22 million doubled. Then it tripled. Then Silas Holloway finally struck oil. He flew to New York and placed a thick, encrypted hard drive on my mahogany desk. He looked exhausted but triumphant. Elara Montgomery's empire is a mirage, Daisy, Silas said, pouring himself a scotch from my bar cart. It looks like solid marble from the outside, but the foundation is rotting wood. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Show me. Silas projected the financial architecture of Montgomery Holdings onto my wall monitor. Alex isn't the businessman his father was, and Elara is too proud to admit she's bleeding cash. The commercial real estate market in Chicago took a massive hit post-pandemic. Their flagship skyscrapers in the Loop are operating at 40% occupancy. But Elara refused to lower the Montgomery lifestyle or downgrade their public charity galas. She needed cash to cover the massive margins on their loans. Where did she get it? I asked, my eyes scanning the dizzying web of offshore accounts Silas had mapped out. Silas smirked grimly. She embezzled it. She created 3 shell companies in the Cayman Islands and has been illegally siphoning funds from the Montgomery Children's Foundation, their own nonprofit charity, to artificially inflate the revenue of their failing commercial properties. It's wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny on a federal scale. If the SEC or the IRS looks at these books, Alex and Elara are going to federal prison for a decade. A cold, dark smile spread across my face. Elara had called me a pedestrian mistake. She had told me I had no pedigree. But she was nothing more than a high society thief stealing from a children's charity to pay for her Chanel suits. But that's not all, Silas continued, pulling up a new document. To keep the banks from calling in their loans, Alex leveraged their only remaining unencumbered asset. The family estate? I guessed. Exactly. Silas nodded. They took out a massive bridge loan against the Lake Forest estate and their remaining liquid assets, $60 million, and the balloon payment is due in exactly 90 days. With their current cash flow, they are mathematically incapable of paying it. They are going to default. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, a symphony of lights and glass. 3 years ago, I was a bleeding, broken woman sobbing in a hospital bed, forced to sell her children to survive. Now, the guillotine was fully assembled, and Elara Montgomery had willingly placed her neck on the block. I picked up my phone and dialed Julian Sterling. Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. I need Aegis Global to do some shopping. Find out who holds the $60 million debt on Montgomery Holdings. Buy it. I don't care what premium you have to pay. Buy the debt and ensure the contract allows for immediate seizure of collateral upon default. Hostile acquisition? Julian asked, his voice purring with excitement. No, I replied. An execution. 90 days later, the trap snapped shut. The financial pages of the Wall Street Journal began whispering about a liquidity crisis at Montgomery Holdings. The rumors were true. Alex was in full panic mode. According to my inside sources, Silas had successfully bribed a paralegal in Gregory Pierce's law firm. Alex was desperately trying to secure a bailout, but traditional banks were running for the hills. The commercial real estate market was too volatile, and the Montgomery portfolio was toxic. They needed a private equity savior. They needed someone willing to take a massive risk for exorbitant interest rates. They needed Aegis Global Partners. When Alex's frantic associates reached out to Aegis, Julian Sterling played the part perfectly. He feigned hesitation, squeezed them for unprecedented concessions, and finally agreed to an emergency restructuring meeting. If Aegis agreed to refinance the debt, the Montgomerys would survive. If not, Aegis, as the sole holder of their defaulted loans, had the legal right to seize the Lake Forest estate, liquidate their commercial properties, and effectively bankrupt the family overnight. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning in the penthouse boardroom of a neutral, glass-walled high-rise in downtown Chicago. I flew in on a private jet the night before. I hadn't set foot in Chicago since the day I walked out of the hospital. The air felt heavier here, thick with ghosts and stolen memories, but I wasn't the terrified, exhausted schoolteacher anymore. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. My hair was sleek, my posture impeccable, and my eyes were deadened to anything resembling mercy. At 9:45 a.m., I sat at the head of the massive oak boardroom table. Julian sat to my right, looking like a patrician kingmaker. Silas stood quietly by the window, a briefcase containing the Cayman Island documents resting at his feet. At exactly 10 a.m., the heavy glass doors swung open. Alex walked in first. The last 3 years had not been kind to him. His hairline was receding. There were deep, dark bags under his eyes, and his bespoke suit hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he had lost weight from the stress. He looked like a man, standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind him walked Alara, flanked by Gregory Pierce. Even facing financial ruin, Alara maintained her aristocratic haughtiness. Her chin was tilted up, her pearls gleaming, her eyes scanning the room with expected authority. They didn't look at me at first. Their attention was entirely on Julian Sterling, the famous billionaire savior they had come to beg. "Mr. Sterling," Alex said, stepping forward with a forced, salesman-like smile, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us on such short notice. We believe Montgomery Holdings offers a unique, highly lucrative restructuring opportunity for Aegis." Julian didn't take Alex's hand. He merely smiled, a predatory glint in his eye, and gestured toward me. "Alex, Mrs. Montgomery," Julian said smoothly. "I'm just the face of Aegis. I don't make the final decisions on acquisitions of this magnitude. You need to speak with our majority shareholder and founder. She has taken a very personal interest in your portfolio." Alex and Alara turned their heads to look at the head of the table. I leaned forward slowly, resting my manicured hands on the polished wood. I let the silence stretch, watching the gears turn in their heads. At first, there was only confusion. I looked different. The soft, tired girl they had bullied was gone, replaced by a woman made of titanium and ice. But as my eyes locked onto Alex's, the recognition hit him like a physical blow to the chest. All the color drained from Alex's face. He stumbled backward, actually knocking into one of the heavy leather chairs. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Alara froze. For the first time since I had met her, the terrifying matriarch of the Montgomery family looked genuinely disoriented. Her eyes darted from my face, to Julian, to the legal documents on the table, and back to me. "Hello, Alex." "Alara," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "It's been exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Please, take a seat. We have a lot of numbers to discuss. This is a joke," Alara whispered, her voice trembling slightly before she caught herself, her spine stiffening. "Gregory, what kind of sick stunt is this? Who put her up to this?" Gregory Pierce looked equally pale, frantically whispering into Alex's ear. "It's no stunt, Ilara," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Aegis Global Partners owns the entirety of your defaulted debt. $60 million, plus compounded interest and penalties. As of midnight last night, Montgomery Holdings is officially in default. You are trespassing in a world you no longer own." "You?" Alex gasped, finally finding his voice. It cracked pitifully. "How could you possibly? Where did you get the capital to buy our debt?" I smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "You gave it to me, Alex. You and your mother. $22 million. I took your buyout, and I weaponized it. You thought you were buying my exile. You were actually funding my siege. You signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement," Gregory Pierce barked, trying to muster his usual intimidation tactics. "You are in breach of contract. You are legally forbidden from contacting my clients." "I didn't contact your clients, Gregory," I replied coldly, gesturing to the room. "Your clients came crawling to my company, begging for a financial lifeline because they are utterly, pathetically bankrupt. The NDA prevented me from claiming my children or identifying myself as a Montgomery. It said absolutely nothing about a corporate entity I own, legally acquiring your toxic assets in the open market." Ilara slammed her hands on the table, her composure shattering. The veneer of the high society queen cracked, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. "You little parasite, you think you can outsmart us? You think a few years playing dress-up on Wall Street makes you a threat? We will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. We will destroy you. Will you?" I asked softly. I snapped my fingers. Silas Holloway stepped forward, placed the briefcase on the table, and clicked it open. He pulled out 3 thick, bound dossiers and slid one to Alex, one to Ilara, and one to Gregory. "Take a look at page 4, Ilara," I instructed. Alex opened his folder with trembling hands. I watched as his eyes scanned the documents, the Cayman Island wire transfers, the fake vendor invoices, the blatant theft from the Montgomery Children's Foundation. "Mother," Alex breathed, looking up at Ilara in absolute horror. "Mother, what is this? Did you steal from the charity?" Ilara stared at the documents, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Suddenly, incredibly old. "If I foreclose on your assets today," I explained, my tone strictly business, "your books will be opened to the bankruptcy courts. The federal investigators will see exactly what I am looking at. You won't just lose your company, Ilara. You will lose your freedom. Wire fraud of this magnitude carries a mandatory federal sentence. You will die in a concrete cell." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted completely. I held their lives, their legacy, and their freedom in the palm of my hand, and I was ready to close my fist. "What do you want, Daisy?" Alex whispered, tears welling in his eyes. The cowardly boy who had abandoned me in the hospital was back, begging for mercy. I stood up slowly, buttoning my suit jacket, and walked around the table until I was standing directly behind Alex's chair, looking down at Ilara. "I don't want your money," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I already have more of it than you ever did. I want what you stole from me." "What do you want, Daisy?" Alex's voice was a hollow, pathetic rasp. He looked at me not as his former wife, but as a towering, incomprehensible force of nature that had just kicked the doors off his fragile reality. I looked down at Ilara. The color had entirely drained from her aristocratic face. For the first time in her pampered, ruthless life, she was staring down the barrel of a gun she couldn't buy her way out of. "I want exactly what you took from me," I said softly, the silence in the boardroom amplifying every syllable. "I want my children. They are Montgomery's," Ilara hissed, a final, desperate flare of her dying ego. "They belong to this family. You cannot just take them." "This family is a criminal enterprise, Ilara," I shot back, my voice cracking like a whip. "And they haven't been raised by you anyway. They've been raised by Maria Vargas." Alex flinched. Gregory Pierce dropped his pen. "Did you really think I wouldn't watch them?" I asked. a bitter smile touching my lips. Did you think I would just walk away and hope for the best? Maria has been on my payroll since the week you hired her. I know that Leo had an ear infection last month, that you, Alex, were too busy to attend to. I know Lily's first word was, "Ma," and she said it to the nanny, not to her grandmother who is supposedly protecting their pedigree. Alex buried his face in his hands, a jagged sob escaping his throat. "Here is the deal," I said, stepping back to my chair and pulling a thick, leather-bound folder from my briefcase. I slid it across the polished oak table toward Alex. Inside this folder is a legally binding relinquishment of parental rights. It grants full, uncontested, and sole custody of Leo and Lily to me. It waives your right to visitation, and it forbids you from ever contacting them. It is the exact same contract you forced me to sign 3 years ago. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a sleek, black fountain pen. I laid it gently on top of the folder. "Sign it," I commanded. "Sign it, and Aegis Global Partners will restructure your debt. We will strip you of your commercial properties because you are unfit to manage them, but we will leave you the Lake Forest estate and just enough residual income to keep you out of bankruptcy court. Which means your books stay closed, and Alara doesn't spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary." "Alex, you can't," Gregory Pierce warned frantically. "You are giving up your heirs." "If I don't sign it," Alex whispered, his eyes locked on the black pen, "she destroys us. She destroys the company, we lose the house, and Mother goes to prison." He looked at Alara, waiting for his mother to tell him what to do. He was waiting for her to protect him, to tell him to fight for his children, to find a legal loophole. Instead, the great Alara Montgomery looked at the Cayman Island documents, then looked at her son, and made the most selfish, predictable choice of her life. "Sign the damn papers, Alex," she ordered, her voice shaking with barely suppressed terror. Alex stared at her, utterly betrayed. The illusion of his mother's grand, protective love shattered right in front of him. She wasn't protecting the Montgomery legacy, she was protecting her own skin. With trembling hands, Alex picked up the fountain pen. Tears spilled onto the pristine legal paper as he signed his rights away. Alex Montgomery. He surrendered his title as a father. Gregory Pierce wordlessly notarized the documents and slid the folder back to me. "Thank you," I said, slipping the folder back into my briefcase. "The restructuring contracts will be sent to your office by end of day. You have 48 hours to vacate the downtown offices." "You promised to keep this quiet," Alara sneered, her composure slightly returning now that she believed the threat of prison was gone. "You promised not to show those embezzling documents to the authorities." "I did." I nodded, walking toward the glass doors of the boardroom. "I promised Aegis Global Partners would not turn you in during a bankruptcy audit." I paused, my hand on the handle, and looked back at them with eyes devoid of any pity. "But Silas Holloway doesn't work for Aegis. He works for me, and I am under no obligation to protect a thief." Ilara's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. You sent the files?" An anonymous tip was couriered to the Chicago branch of the IRS and the FBI Financial Crimes Division at 9 o'clock this morning, I said coldly. "They are probably securing warrants for the Montgomery Children's Foundation as we speak. You might keep your house, Ilara, but you will pay for what you did." "You lying bitch!" Alex screamed, standing up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. "Karma is a mirror, Alex," I said quietly. "I'm just forcing you to look into it." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of the Montgomery Empire burning behind me. An hour later, I stood in the sunlit playground of a private park on the Gold Coast. Maria Vargas was sitting on a bench, watching two beautiful, dark-haired 3-year-olds building a wobbly tower out of wooden blocks. My heart hammered in my chest, a violent, desperate rhythm. 3 years of ice melted in a single, agonizing instant. I walked toward them. Maria looked up, recognized me from our countless encrypted video calls, and smiled through tears. She stood up and stepped back. Leo dropped his block. He looked at me, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity. Lily hid behind her brother, peeking out at the stranger. I dropped to my knees on the soft grass, ruining my custom suit, and held out my trembling arms. "Hi, my sweet babies," I choked out, the tears finally, freely falling. "Mommy's here. Mommy's finally here." They didn't know me yet. Not really. But as I pulled them into my arms, inhaling the sweet, powdery scent of their skin, I knew we had the rest of our lives to learn. Vengeance is often described as a poison you drink yourself. But sometimes, it is the only antidote to absolute power. I didn't just buy my children back. I dismantled the cage they were born into. Today, Leo, Lily, and I live quietly, far from Chicago's gilded rot. The Montgomery Empire is finally dust, proving definitively that the absolute highest price anyone can ever pay is underestimating a mother's relentless love.